Hello and welcome to Vaping Unplugged. This time we have a special episode without any fancy intro or outros because we wanted to give you a news update rather quickly from COP11 because that is going on at the moment. We are recording on Wednesday evening, so it's day 3 of COP and a lot of things already happened. So therefore we thought let's get together and give you an update because my colleagues Alberto and Liza were on the ground. I was in the WVA war room and watched everything we were allowed to watch from the outside, which is not too much. But let's start with the basics, Alberto. It's called the WHO FCTC COP11, so a very good name that people are getting confused what it actually is. So maybe let's start with a quick overview. What is COP11? What is the FCTC?
Right. So, hello everyone. Well, the WHO FCTC COP11 is basically a conference on a treaty. It is the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is a treaty that countries sign in which they compromise basically to measures to reduce tobacco smoking. And then the COP is the Conference of the Parties. So this is the 11th edition of the Conference Parties. It happens every 2 years. And then countries meet to discuss new regulations, new restrictions so that they can reduce initially the harm of smoking or the prevalence of smoking. And now in the latest years, it has been switching more towards a restrictionist approach on nicotine rather than smoking. So countries are meeting here in Geneva this time, and they're discussing how they can further reduce smoking, what measures they should implement to tackle it, and also discussing on new forms of consumption of nicotine, such as vapes, heat-not-burn tobacco products, and nicotine pouches, basically.
Yeah, and all of us, we were in front of several COP conference halls now. So maybe Lisa, you give us a quick intro. What would you say are the main problems on a very basic level when it comes to COP and the negotiations
Yes.
behind the closed doors?
Yes, I mean, you already mentioned the first and probably a very big problem. The COP11 this year and the previous COP was also going behind the closed doors, absolutely non-transparent. The consumer advocates, numbers of independent experts and organizations are just not allowed in a room. There is no diversity in the opinion, and it's a big problem because that's a good hint of on what is going on in WHO right now around tobacco harm reduction. They just don't want to see. Not only they don't want to see, but they also don't want to show the science behind less risky nicotine alternatives, and they are completely neglecting it. So FCTC Secretariat is denying science right now, and what they're doing is that they're very ideologically driven. So they're shutting down all the discussions around tobacco harm reduction, claiming that harm reduction cannot, as a term, cannot even apply to tobacco, which is an absurd because we know in how many fields it has actually worked. So yeah, we were in Geneva trying to advocate for less harmful nicotine alternatives, as always, fight for consumer choice and fight for vapers' voices. However, we were not at COP11, we were at Good COP, so probably we will talk more about it throughout the podcast as well.
Yeah, definitely. We will get into that. But I would say let's stay first at the bad cop or the real cop, or I don't know how to call it, where the country delegations meet. And the last 2 days, I had the pleasure to listen to 104 statements. And it was actually, obviously, it was a bit tiring, but also I did that the first time to follow it that closely. And it was quite strange because out of the 104 statements, probably 98 of them were basically boasting about their prohibitionist policies, what they do and what they banned and how they ban stuff. And the scary part about it, there was no talk from almost none of the countries what the actual output of all these policies are. Nobody looked at, does it actually work? Do smoking rates go down? Do smoking related illnesses go down? That is not the issue of the COP. Everybody needs to show what they did and how much they banned, and one country needs to be stricter than the other, and then they win. And I think we already saw that a bit, because some countries spoke out, which was very good, because I would say in general it's a very echo chamber like conference. Dissenting voices from the outside are not allowed at all, like you mentioned, Lisa, consumers, but also no independent experts and public health scientists are in there. So it's very one-sided and very anti-tobacco, anti-nicotine nowadays too. But there were some countries who spoke up in favor of harm reduction. And one of them was New Zealand, and quite rightly so, because they are on track to become smoke-free due to their very open attitude towards vaping, and hopefully soon also nicotine pouches. I think they are at around 6% smoking rate at the moment. So they are almost there and doing way better than most countries in the room. And then, of course, typically Bloomberg-funded organization, the Global Alliance for Tobacco Control, gave out a dirty ashtray to New Zealand because they dare to follow a different part than the WHO wants to do. And also completely ignoring that the path New Zealand took is actually successful compared to the others. And I think it might be cool to just listen to a short part of the New Zealand delegate speech, because that was very different than all the others and very positive. So let's get into it.
We apply risk proportionate regulations to vaping products to ensure that they are available to support people in quitting smoking while discouraging youth uptake. New Zealand continues to tighten regulatory controls to protect youth, including retail, product and marketing rules to strengthen reinforcement. These measures are working. 2025 data shows that vaping rates continue to fall. New Zealand remains firm committed to reducing the immense harm caused by tobacco control, utilising all three aspects of tobacco control as defined in Article 1D of the Convention: supply, demand and harm reduction strategies.
I think it's funny that she misspoke a little bit when she said, or I assumed she did, when she said they want to reduce the harm from tobacco control. And I mean, it probably was a mistake, but it's quite true. But Alberto, what do you say about this? She mentioned even risk-based regulation, a thing we try to promote everywhere. So quite positive, no?
Yeah, I'm super happy that not only New Zealand, which is a great example because they are basically ending smoking in their country through THR supportive policies, but there were also other countries that were very supportive of safer nicotine products. And I think it's great that they can stand up and raise their voices and defend consumers and safer alternatives. And I think well, the WHO follows a very ideological approach, right? Basically, they're against tobacco, but they are mostly against nicotine, and they want to ban it everywhere. And when they see a country that is making them look ridiculous because they are supporting and putting in place the opposite policies that the WHO proposes, and they are ending smoking with those, it just makes the WHO look ridiculous. That's why they try to shame or punish New Zealand with this golden ashtray prize, which is stupid. So yeah, I'm very happy that there are countries that are standing up and defending what is really making people quit and live healthier lives. And New Zealand is a great example of that. We've been supporting it for so many years, and now it's making clear and it's making the WHO ashamed of their own policies they support.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that makes it's a bit embarrassing for the whole organization. I would say that's why they also never mention Sweden, for example, or never mentioned UK, even though the UK statement was very disappointing, unfortunately. So for those who are interested, on our Twitter channel, also Instagram and my personal Twitter channel, we clipped the few positive statements so far. They are already online. Just to mention them, maybe because some of the countries were a bit surprising or before didn't really speak out about the issue. They were Serbia, North Macedonia, Albania, Mozambique, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Gambia. And they all had a little bit of different aspects, but basically all of them said that they want open, transparent debate and discussion at COP, and every measure should be grounded on science and harm reduction. And let's hear one more example. The short clip from the Gambia statement, I think, is interesting, and then we can go into what's going to happen in the next few days policy-wise a little bit.
Colleagues, reaffirming our commitment to the convention does not preclude openness to scientific evidence, evolving innovations, or new regulatory approaches. Being pragmatic and evidence-informed is not contradictory to strong tobacco control. Rather, it strengthens our credibility and effectiveness. Innovations, emerging products, and evolving scientific assessments must be examined rigorously, responsibly, and with appropriate safeguards, always anchored in public health protection, particularly for our young people. Global debates must reflect the realities and context of all parties.
I mean, to be very frank, I think that is a big FU into FCTC's face in a diplomatic way and in a diplomatic setting. But that is so the contrary what the WHO and FCTC propagate. And I think with that, it probably makes sense to look into the two most controversial issues, which will be discussed today and the rest of the week. Unfortunately, behind closed doors, there won't be live streams anymore. We don't know which countries will say what and advocate for what. But the two measures most people talk about are the one issue that harm reduction should be painted as a kind of industry ploy, or even I would say conspiracy theory, which is obviously problematic, and the others are the forward-looking measures. Does anybody of you want to get into one of those first?
I mean, sure, I can just go ahead. I think, first of all, why the WHO tries to frame tobacco harm reduction as an industry narrative is because the approach that they follow is just like a castle of cards. Whenever some other country puts in place tobacco harm reduction measures, it falls down. That's why they try to prevent every country from implementing tobacco harm reduction measures. And that's why they are keeping those countries that are not doing it from doing so. They try to shame them and say, if you do this, if you allow or you encourage smokers to switch to either either vapes or heat-not-burn products or nicotine pouches, then you are following the industry narrative. And, that's not what you should be doing, because as long as one country dissents from them and tries to follow that narrative or those policies, they are going to be ashamed, because all their theories about tobacco control are going to be falling down. Lisa, I don't know if you want to comment on the other one. You can go ahead.
I want to comment on harm reduction part, actually, because I was listening to Dr. Tyndall the other day on podcast, and I think he's very, very interesting speaker to listen to. And he was explaining how harm reduction was very controversial in many fields initially, not only in tobacco, and how eventually it worked, and it worked better than anything else. If it worked in HIV prevention, if it worked for drug addiction, even like opioid substitution programs or clean needle programs. We know that also harm reduction are simple things, like everyday things like helmet or seatbelt or condoms. Like no one is claiming that condoms are just like a tactic from condom companies, right? It would be stupid. So What I'm trying to say here is that they're completely neglecting the fact that if it worked for other fields, like this kind of non-stigmatizing, non-moralizing approach, but rather understanding that if you have means to reduce harm, you should do it. You should just go for it. And they're not doing that part, in my opinion, because like I was talking to one of our partners from South Africa, Cortio, and he said a very thing that is right, in my opinion, because they are scared to open the doors and to hear more arguments that how harm reduction actually works, because then they have to admit that all these claims and all this misleading information was a mistake. And that probably would be a disaster for them. So I don't understand, if harm reduction worked in other fields, why should not it be discussed for tobacco? And if it's not, how it is science and not ideology, because it's purely ideologically driven right now.
Yeah, if I can add something on that, I think that, if we want to have, and this is what we have been advocating for, if we want to have a serious conversation about how to end smoking, and we want to be open and transparent, we need to have all the stakeholders included. And the industry is one of them, and you cannot just exclude them from the conversation, saying that countries will just follow their narrative. But I might understand to some point that they don't want to have a tobacco industry narrative in there, but if they could just listen to consumers, and there are millions around the world, which are consumers that are non-funded by the tobacco industry and that have managed to quit and live much healthier lives through nicotine pouches, vapes, heat-not-burn products. That's not tobacco industry narrative. That's just reality, and they should listen to it. And then on the other thing that you asked about, Michael, these forward-looking measures, I think those are just ridiculous, because they are not forward-looking measures. They are measures that have been implemented in some countries already, and they have been a complete fiasco. They've proven to be a complete failure, and they will not work anywhere else. So they should just plainly reject all of them.
Yeah, and what are those? Maybe you give a quick overview. My favorite one is the last point, where they basically say that tobacco sales should be nationalized. So we are back to the 80s or 70s. I'm not sure what that should change, and everything should be non-profit. So it's will work definitely very, very well.
I mean, I couldn't choose one, because I think all of the measures that they propose are completely draconian and unrealistic. But the one that you mentioned, that's what is driven some countries to actually oppose and ban all the alternative nicotine products, because they are
It's the
so,
Chinese model.
especially the Chinese model, yeah, because they are so trapped for cash that they want to keep everybody smoking and not using the alternative products, so they can raise more taxes, they can raise more revenue. That's simply stupid, and it goes against the very foundations of the FCTC treaty and the goals of the WHO.
Yeah, and I mean, all those things, they, as you mentioned, they are tested. I mean, we have countries where they
Yeah.
implemented those things like flavor bans or very low nicotine levels. Those kind of things, we already know that they simply don't work in real life. Up to complete bans, which are the language in there would allow bans too. That's why the European Union didn't agree on a position on it, because some countries didn't want to have this ban language in there, which is a good thing, I think. But since we are a bit running out of time, let's quickly get into the positive side. And also the reason why you, Alberto, are still in Geneva. Lisa, you came back, I think, today from Geneva. What did you do there, and what did you experience?
Lisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. I'm sorry, my since it's like a spontaneous podcast, my internet connection is super bad, so I'm trying jumping out. But I hope this works now. Yeah, we were attending together with Alberto the Good COP, which it's the second time that this kind of conference is happening. We gathered together with consumers, tobacco harm reduction advocates, experts, and we made sure that even though there are even more people around the world, obviously, who support harm reduction, we made sure to do as much as we can to raise awareness and to spread the word and to say things that won't be said at COP11 and won't be heard. Even though it's definitely a very positive sign that there were a couple of delegates in countries that unexpectedly took a right stance, and it's a positive thing. There were, as you said, Michael, a couple of disappointments as well. For instance, the UK, which has a swap to stop program, but still didn't mention how successful it is, because their smoking rates are going down because of the fact that they're giving out vape kits to people who are smokers. So yeah, that's sad, but we made sure to talk about that, talk about real life examples, talk about the countries that are advancing harm reduction, talk about the countries that are following the recommendations from FCTC and how they are actually failing tobacco harm reduction generally, how smoking rates are stagnant mostly in those countries, and how consumers are criminalized, and that should not be happening. So it's a pleasure, first of all, to see all those people working hard to raise awareness, and it's very important that there was a platform where we were also present.
And now I'm not sure anymore if you already mentioned it, but I think we should also definitely say a big thank you to the organizers, the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, who put this whole conference together after Panama, now in Geneva. It's a lot of work, so we highly appreciate that WVA was a part or played a role in there. Alberto, what was your role there?
Yeah, I was gonna say I wanted to thank the Taxpayers Alliance for organizing the COP, which in this case is the Conference of the People, not the Conference of the Parties. And there we were discussing everything that Liza mentioned, also how to put pressure on the FCTC and the WHO to change their trajectory and acknowledge consumer experience and successful models of harm reduction like Sweden, New Zealand, the UK. In the example of the UK, was disappointed that they didn't stand up for these measures, but I think what we are seeing is a rising tide of scientific evidence, consumer experience, everything pointing out that safer alternatives work. They reduce the harm for tobacco. They allow people to consume nicotine much safer way. So I think this is unstoppable. And this is why there are some countries that are unable to not talk about this anymore. So they have to stand up and recognize that there is a different way, there is a different model, there is an alternative to stop people from smoking. And I'm very glad that some countries like Gambia, Albania, Serbia are, mentioning THR. I think it was a very positive surprise.
Alberto, I think those were already the perfect closing words. So I won't add anything else anymore, except that we maybe will be back end of the week with a spontaneous ad hoc podcast again. If something bigger is happening during COP and something gets out, we will see. If not, next time we promise the full production with nice intros and outros will be back as well. Thank you everyone for listening. Thanks to the two of you for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you guys. See you.